The morning of King Charles III's coronation dawned with a gentle mist hanging over London, as if the city itself was holding its breath for the historic moment ahead. Westminster Abbey buzzed with quiet preparation as centuries-old traditions came alive once more. Among the sea of dignitaries, royals, and officials, Prince William stood in his ceremonial robes, carrying the weight of future kingship on his shoulders. As the heir apparent, William had attended countless royal ceremonies throughout his life, but this coronation held special significance. Today, his father would officially become king, and William would step one crucial step closer to his own destiny. The prince had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing the ancient rituals and understanding his role in the sacred ceremony. The abbey filled with guests from around the world, each person representing nations, institutions, and causes close to the royal family's heart. Television cameras positioned strategically throughout the historic building would broadcast this moment to millions of viewers globally. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and reverence for the tradition that had shaped British monarchy. For over 1,000 years, William's wife, Catherine, sat nearby with their 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. The young princes and princess had been carefully prepared for this solemn occasion, though their father knew that long. Ceremonies could be challenging for children. He caught Catherine's eye and shared a brief, reassuring smile that spoke of their shared understanding of the moment's importance. As the Archbishop of Canterbury began the ancient words that would transform his father from Prince of Wales to King, William felt the full weight of history settling around him. This wasn't just his father's moment, it was a passing of responsibility that would eventually reach him. The prince understood that millions of people around the world were watching, many of them seeing the monarchy's future in his presence. At this ceremony, the music swelled through the abbey's ancient stones, the voices of the choir lifting in harmonies that had echoed through these walls for generations of coronations. William stood perfectly still, his military training evident in his posture and bearing. Yet beneath the formal exterior, emotions stirred that would soon surprise everyone present, including himself. Outside the abbey, crowds had gathered since dawn, their faces painted with flags and their voices ready to cheer their new king. The ceremony inside would be broadcast to these loyal supporters, creating a connection between the intimate religious service and the celebration of millions. Street parties had been planned across the Commonwealth, with families gathering around televisions to witness this historic transition. The weight of the crown that would soon rest upon his father's head seemed to press upon William's own consciousness. He thought of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose recent passing had brought them all to this moment. Her steady presence had defined his entire life, and now the monarchy was entering a new chapter under his father's leadership as ancient. Latin phrases filled the air and ceremonial objects were presented with reverence earned through centuries of use. William found himself thinking not just of tradition, but of the future. The monarchy would continue to evolve, and he would play an increasingly important role in guiding that evolution. The children sitting nearby would grow up in a world where their grandfather was king, and they too would eventually understand the responsibilities that came with their royal birth. The moment approached when his father would be officially crowned, and William felt his heart begin to beat faster. Something was building within him, an emotion he hadn't fully anticipated. The combination of pride, love, responsibility, and the weight of history was creating a perfect storm of feeling that would soon overflow in a way that would touch millions of viewers around the world. The Archbishop raised the St. Edward's crown, its gold and precious stones catching the light filtering through the abbey's stained glass windows. This was the moment that would change everything, and William braced himself for the transformation that was about to occur, not just in his father, but in the entire royal family and the nation they served. The moment the St. Edward's crown touched King Charles's head, profound silence fell over Westminster Abbey. Even the youngest children seemed to sense the gravity of what had just occurred. William watched as his father's expression changed. Subtly, the weight of kingship was now his to bear, and decades of preparation had led to this single, transformative instant. But it was what happened next that no one had expected, least of all William himself. As the newly crowned King Charles turned to face the congregation, his eyes sought out his eldest son. When their gazes met, something passed between them that transcended the formal ceremony surrounding them. It was a look that spoke of love, pride, legacy, and the unbreakable bond between father and son. William felt his carefully maintained composure begin to crack. Throughout his life, he had been trained to control his emotions during public appearances, to maintain the dignified reserve expected of senior royals. Yet in this moment, watching his father accept the ultimate responsibility of the crown, William found himself overwhelmed by feelings he hadn't fully anticipated. The prince's eyes began to glisten with unshed tears as the full impact of the moment hit him. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was the end of one era and the beginning of another. His father, who had waited 74 years to become king, had finally reached his destiny, and William, now officially the heir apparent to a reigning monarch, felt the future pressing upon him with unprecedented clarity. Catherine noticed her husband's emotional state and gently placed her hand on his arm, offering silent support. She understood better than most the pressures and emotions that came with royal duty, having navigated her own journey from commoner to future queen consort. Her touch was both comforting and grounding, reminding William that he wasn't alone. In carrying these responsibilities, the ceremony continued around them. But William was lost in a cascade of memories and emotions. He thought of his childhood, when his father would read him stories about knights and kings. He remembered teenage years when the reality of his future role had sometimes felt overwhelming. He recalled his military service, where he had found purpose and brotherhood away from royal duties, and how that experience had shaped his understanding of service and sacrifice. Most powerfully, William thought of his mother, Princess Diana, and how she would have felt seeing her eldest son at this moment. The prince had often wondered what advice she might have given him about carrying royal responsibilities while remaining true to himself and his values. Her memory was a constant presence in his life, and he felt her absence keenly during these significant family moments. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally escaped, trailing down William's cheeks as he stood in the ancient abbey, surrounded by the pomp and ceremony of British royalty. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelming emotion, pride in his father's achievement, of love for his family, and of acceptance of his own future role. Television cameras, positioned to capture every moment of the historic ceremony, caught William's emotional response. The image of the future king moved to tears by his father's coronation began transmitting to viewers around the world. Social media immediately picked up on the moment, with millions of people sharing and commenting on the prince's genuine display of emotion. What made the moment even more powerful was its complete authenticity. This wasn't a calculated display for public consumption. It was a son responding naturally to seeing his father achieve the role. He had been preparing for his entire adult life. The raw humanity of the moment cut through centuries of royal protocol and tradition, showing viewers that beneath the titles and ceremonies, the royal family experienced the same deep emotions as any other family. The archbishop continued with the ancient ritual, but many in the congregation found themselves watching William rather than the official proceedings. His emotional response had created a ripple effect throughout the abbey, with several other family members visibly moved by both the ceremony and William's reaction to it, as the prince composed himself. Wiping away the tears while maintaining his dignified posture, he caught his father's eye once more. King Charles's expression showed understanding and love, acknowledging his son's emotional moment without breaking the solemnity of his own coronation. It was a brief exchange, but one that spoke volumes about their relationship and the trust that would be essential as they navigated this new chapter together. As the coronation ceremony reached its crescendo, William's emotional moment had already gone reverberating far beyond the walls of Westminster Abbey. Television viewers around the world found themselves unexpectedly moved by the prince's genuine display of emotion. Social media platforms exploded with shares, comments, and reactions as people witnessed what they described as a beautifully human moment. In an otherwise formal royal ceremony, the image of William with tears in his eyes became an instant sensation. but not in the sensationalized way that often surrounded royal family moments. Instead, people responded with warmth and understanding. Recognizing the authentic emotion of a son watching his father fulfill a lifelong destiny, comments poured in from viewers who found themselves crying alongside the prince, touched by the raw humanity he displayed in that sacred moment. News anchors covering the event struggled to maintain their professional composure as they described William's reaction. Veteran royal correspondents, who had covered decades of royal events, found themselves unexpectedly emotional as they tried to explain the significance of what viewers had just witnessed. The moment transcended typical royal coverage, becoming something deeper and more meaningful than ceremonial reporting. Back in the Abbey, William had regained his composure, but remained deeply affected by the experience. As the ceremony continued, with the presentation of the orb and scepter to the newly crowned king, the prince found himself seeing his father with new eyes. This was no longer just his dad. This was the King of England, the head of the Commonwealth, the supreme governor of the Church of England. The transformation was both profound and deeply personal. The prince's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, had watched their father's emotional moment with the innocent understanding that children possess. They saw their father cry and sensed the importance of the moment, even if they couldn't fully grasp its historical significance. Charlotte reached over to take her father's hand, offering the simple comfort that only a child can provide in moments of overwhelming emotion. Catherine continued to provide quiet support, her presence a steady anchor as William processed the full impact of what was occurring. She understood that this moment would be remembered not just as part of the coronation ceremony, but as a defining moment in William's own journey toward kingship. Her husband's emotional response showed the world that he understood the weight of his future responsibilities and felt them deeply. The Archbishop's voice continued to fill the ancient space as the ceremony moved through its prescribed elements. But for William, time seemed to move differently. Each ritual felt weighted with new meaning now that his father was officially king. The homage that would be paid, the anthems that would be sung, the procession that would follow all of it, now carried the reality of his father's new role and his own elevated position as heir to the throne. International viewers watching the ceremony found themselves unexpectedly invested in William's emotional journey. Royal watchers from Australia to Canada, from New Zealand to Jamaica, saw in his tears a reflection of their own complex relationships with the monarchy. Some who had been indifferent to royal ceremonies found themselves moved by the prince's obvious love for his father and his deep understanding of what the moment meant for their family and the nations they served. The media reaction was swift and overwhelmingly positive. Headlines around the world focused not on the formal aspects of the coronation, but on William's emotional response. Future king moved to tears. William's beautiful moment, the human face of royalty, became the stories that dominated coverage, shifting the narrative from ceremonial duty to genuine family emotion. Royal biographers and experts found themselves reassessing their understanding of William's character. Many had written about his reserved nature and his careful approach to public life. But this moment revealed depths of emotion and humanity that the public rarely saw. The tears weren't a sign of weakness. They were evidence of a man who understood the profound nature of his role and felt the responsibility deeply. As the ceremony progressed, William noticed how his emotional moment had affected others in the congregation. He caught glimpses of guests wiping their own eyes, moved by the authenticity of his response. The moment had created a ripple effect of emotion throughout the Abbey, transforming what could have been a merely formal occasion into something deeply human and connecting. The prince realized that his unguarded moment had accomplished something that years of carefully crafted public appearances might not have achieved. He had shown the world that the future of the monarchy resided in someone who felt deeply loved, genuinely, and understood the weight of service that came with his birthright. The tears had become a bridge between the ancient institution of monarchy and the very human emotions that drove his commitment to serve. In the hours following the coronation ceremony, as the royal family made their way through the traditional procession back to Buckingham Palace, William found himself still processing the intensity of his emotional response. The crowds lining the streets cheered enthusiastically for their new king. but many had also seen the television coverage of William's tears and responded with additional warmth and affection for the prince who had shown such genuine emotion. Golden State Coach carrying King Charles and Queen Camilla moved slowly through London's streets, followed by other members of the royal family in ceremonial carriages. William sat with Catherine and their children, waving to the crowds while internally marveling at how a single moment of authentic emotion had seemed to shift something fundamental in his relationship with the public. As they reached Buckingham, palace staff members who had worked with the royal family for years approached William with unusual warmth. Many mentioned how moved they had been by his reaction during the ceremony, and how it had reminded them why they chose to dedicate their careers to serving the monarchy. His tears had humanized not just himself, but the entire institution in a way that formal speeches and carefully orchestrated events rarely achieved. The traditional balcony appearance loomed ahead, where the newly crowned king and his family would greet the crowds gathered in front of Buckingham Palace. William prepared himself for what would be another emotionally charged moment, knowing that the public's response to his earlier display of emotion would influence how this appearance was received as the royal family stepped onto the famous balcony. The roar from the crowd below was deafening, but mixed with the traditional cheers for the new king were chants specifically for William. "We love you, William, and thank you for showing your heart," rose from the sea of people below. The prince was surprised by the direct personal connection. He felt with the crowd a connection that seemed to have been forged by his moment of vulnerability in the Abbey. Social media continued to amplify the impact of William's emotional response throughout the day. The hashtag William's tears began trending worldwide. But rather than mockery or criticism, the posts were overwhelmingly supportive and appreciative. People shared their own stories of being moved to tears during significant family moments, creating a global conversation about the importance of showing genuine emotion. Even in public roles, news programs around the world featured royal experts and psychologists discussing the significance of William's reaction. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, specialist in royal psychology, explained to viewers that what we witnessed was a future king demonstrating that emotional intelligence and genuine feeling are not weaknesses in leadership, but strengths. William showed the world that he understands the profound responsibility he will one day inherit, and that understanding moves him deeply. The prince's emotional moment also sparked conversations about masculinity and leadership. Many commentators noted how refreshing it was to see a man in such a prominent position, showing vulnerability and genuine emotion. Father figures around the world found themselves discussing with their children how William's tears demonstrated that real strength includes the ability to feel deeply and show those feelings. Appropriately, international leaders who had attended the coronation began reaching out through diplomatic channels to express how moved they had been by William's response. President Macron of France mentioned in a private conversation with British diplomats that the prince's emotional moment had reminded him of the deep human connections that exist beneath formal diplomatic relationships. The Australian Prime Minister publicly commented that William's tears had shown the Commonwealth a future king who truly understood the weight of service to others. Within the royal household, family members found themselves relating to William's experience in new ways. Several cousins and extended family members privately shared their own moments of being overwhelmed by royal responsibilities, creating deeper bonds and understanding within the family structure. William's willingness to show his emotions had given others permission to acknowledge their own feelings about the complex demands of royal life. The prince himself began to understand that his moment of tears had accomplished something he had been trying to achieve for years through more traditional means. He had wanted to modernize the monarchy's image while respecting its traditions, to show that royalty could be both dignified and relatable. His authentic emotional response had bridged that gap in a way that no calculated public relations strategy could have achieved. Catherine observed her husband, processing the day's events, and recognized that something fundamental had shifted in his approach to his royal role. The tears had not been a moment of weakness to be overcome, but a breakthrough that had connected him with people around the world in an unprecedented way. She watched as William began to realize that his authentic self was not something to be hidden behind royal protocol, but rather something that could strengthen both his personal mission and the monarchy's relevance in the modern world. As evening approached and the formal ceremonies concluded, William looked back on a day that had begun with careful preparation for his father's coronation and had become a defining moment in his own journey toward kingship. The tears that had surprised him in Westminster Abbey had opened a door to a different kind of royal leadership, one built on genuine connection, emotional honesty, and the understanding that true strength includes the courage to feel deeply and show that feeling to the world. In the weeks following the coronation, the impact of William's emotional moment continued to ripple through society in ways no one had anticipated. Letters began arriving at Kensington Palace from people around the world who wanted to share how the prince's tears had affected them personally. Father from Birmingham wrote about how seeing William cry had helped him feel comfortable showing emotion in front of his own children. A teacher from Australia described using the moment as an example in her classroom about how leaders can be both strong and emotionally honest. The prince found himself reading these letters during quiet moments, amazed by the connections people had made with his unguarded response. A grandfather from Canada wrote that he had cried alongside William while watching the ceremony, remembering his own father's funeral and the complex emotions of family transitions. A young woman from New Zealand shared that seeing the future king show vulnerability had helped her understand that emotional depth was a sign of character, not weakness. Mental health organizations began reaching out to William's office, noting that his emotional display had sparked important conversations about men's mental health and the importance of expressing feelings. The Samaritans reported an increase in calls from men saying that seeing Prince William cry had given them permission to seek help for their own emotional struggles. The Mind charity asked if William might consider becoming more involved in their campaigns around emotional well-being. Educational institutions started incorporating William's coronation moment into their curricula about leadership and emotional intelligence. Business schools used the footage to demonstrate authentic leadership in action, showing how genuine emotion could strengthen rather than weaken a leader's connection with their audience. Child psychologists noted that parents were using William's example to teach their children that it was healthy and normal for everyone, including men and leaders, to cry when moved by important moments. The international media had initially focused on the ceremony itself, but as weeks passed, William's emotional response became the story that endured. Documentary makers began planning programs about the changing face of modern royalty, using his tears as a symbol of how the monarchy was evolving to remain relevant in contemporary society. Royal photographers who had captured the moment found their images being requested for exhibitions about authentic human emotion in public life. William himself was initially uncomfortable with the continued attention on what he had considered a private moment shared publicly. He spoke with his father about the unexpected response, and King Charles shared his own perspective on the moment. "You showed the world who you really are," the king told his son. "That authenticity is exactly what the monarchy needs to remain connected to the people we serve. Your tears were not a loss of control. They were evidence of a heart that understands the weight of our responsibilities." The prince began to recognize that his emotional response had created opportunities to engage with causes and communities in new ways. When he visited a veteran support center in Manchester, several former servicemen approached him to say that seeing him cry had helped them feel less ashamed of their own emotional responses to difficult experiences, a retired sergeant told William that his tears had shown that real strength includes having the courage to feel things deeply. Catherine watched her husband navigate this new phase of public engagement with pride and support. She noticed how people responded differently. To William now, there was a warmth and connection that hadn't been there before his emotional moment. Children seemed especially drawn to him, perhaps sensing that he was someone who understood feelings and wouldn't judge them for their own emotional expressions. The royal household staff noticed changes in William's approach to his duties as well. He seemed more relaxed during public engagements and more willing to have genuine conversations with people rather than sticking strictly to formal protocols. His private secretary noted that the prince was accepting more invitations to events focused on mental health, family relationships, and community support, causes that aligned with the emotional intelligence he had displayed during the Coronation International. Royal families began reaching out to William for advice on modernizing their own approaches to public service. Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark mentioned during a private conversation that William's emotional authenticity had inspired discussions in the Danish royal household about being more open with their own feelings during public appearances. The Swedish royal family inquired about incorporating more personal moments into their ceremonial duties. Youth organizations reported that William's emotional display had sparked conversations among young people about leadership and authenticity. University students studying politics and public service wrote essays analyzing how his tears had demonstrated a new model of leadership, one that combined traditional responsibility with emotional honesty. Leadership development programs began using the coronation footage as an example of how powerful authentic emotion could be in building trust and connection. The prince realized that his moment of tears had not just been about his father's coronation or his own future role. It had become a catalyst for broader conversations about what it meant to be human in positions of responsibility. He began to understand that his authentic emotional response had given him a unique platform to advocate for mental health awareness, family connections, and the importance of emotional intelligence in all aspects of life. As he prepared for his increased duties as heir to the throne of a reigning monarch, William carried with him the knowledge that his greatest moment of public vulnerability had become one of his greatest strengths. The tears that had surprised him in Westminster Abbey had opened doors to deeper connections with people around the world, creating possibilities for meaningful service that he was only beginning to explore. A year after his father's coronation, William reflected on how that single moment of authentic emotion had fundamentally changed his relationship with his royal duties and the people he served. What had begun as an unguarded response to witnessing his father become king had evolved into a new understanding of what modern leadership could look like. The prince had learned that showing genuine emotion wasn't a departure from royal tradition. It was an evolution of it. The changes in William's approach to his role were evident in every aspect of his public life. During a visit to a children's hospital in Birmingham, when a young patient asked him if he ever got scared about becoming king, William answered with the same honesty he had shown during the coronation. "Sometimes I do feel scared," he admitted. "But I also feel excited about the chance to help people, just like the doctors and nurses here help you every day." The child's face lit up with understanding, and the moment was shared widely as an example of how authentic communication could make even the most formal institutions accessible to everyone. Mental health charities that had reached out after the coronation found a willing and understanding partner in William. His work with organizations supporting men's mental health had taken on new depth and authenticity. During a campaign launch for emotional well-being awareness, William spoke openly about his coronation experience. "I learned that day that showing our feelings isn't weakness, it's honesty. When we try to hide our emotions, we miss opportunities to connect with others and to show them it's safe to be human." The international impact continued to grow as other royal families and world leaders began adopting more emotionally authentic approaches to their public roles. William received a letter from a young crown prince in a European monarchy, thanking him for showing that future kings could be both dignified and emotionally present. "Your tears gave me permission to be myself," the letter read, "and I believe that will make me a better leader for my people." Educational institutions had thoroughly embraced William's coronation moment as a teaching tool. Harvard Business School included footage of his emotional response in their executive leadership program, using it to demonstrate how authentic emotion could strengthen rather than undermine authority. Child development specialists noted that parents around the world were referencing Prince William's tears when teaching their children that all feelings were acceptable, and that expressing them appropriately was a sign of emotional maturity. The prince's relationship with his own children had also been influenced by the aftermath of his public emotional moment. George, Charlotte, and Louis had seen how positively people responded when their father showed his feelings, and they felt more comfortable expressing their own emotions during both happy and difficult times. Family friends noted that the Wales children seemed unusually emotionally intelligent for their ages, comfortable with both joy and sadness in ways that reflected their father's example. William's work with veterans had deepened significantly as well. His emotional display had resonated particularly strongly with former military personnel who understood the complexity of serving something larger than oneself while maintaining personal emotional health. A veterans support group in Scotland reported that their membership had increased after William's coronation moment, with former servicemen saying they felt comfortable seeking emotional support after seeing their future king display such authentic feeling. The global conversation about masculinity and emotion that had been sparked by William's tears continued to evolve and expand. Research published by the University of Edinburgh found that discussions about men's emotional expression had increased significantly in the months following the coronation, with William's moment frequently cited as an example of strong male emotional leadership. The study noted that traditional concepts of masculine stoicism were being challenged by examples of men in positions of authority who were comfortable expressing genuine feelings, as William prepared for increased responsibilities in his role. As heir to a reigning monarch, he carried with him the understanding that his authentic moment during his father's coronation had become a defining characteristic of his approach to royal service. The tears that had surprised him in Westminster Abbey had taught him that the most powerful tool he possessed as a future king was not ceremonial authority or inherited tradition, but the ability to connect with people through shared human experience. The prince often thought about his mother, Princess Diana, and how she had always emphasized the importance of connecting with people's hearts as well as their minds. In his moment of tears during the coronation, William felt he had found his own way to honor that legacy while remaining true to his own character and the responsibilities of his position. On quiet evenings at home with Catherine and their children, William sometimes reflected on how a single moment of unguarded emotion had changed not just his own understanding of leadership, but had contributed to broader conversations about authenticity, mental health, and the role of emotion in public life. The tears he had shed while watching his father become king had become a bridge between the ancient institution of monarchy and the very human needs of the people it served. The coronation had crowned a new king, but it had also revealed a future king who understood that true strength lay not in hiding one's feelings, but in having the courage to feel deeply and share that humanity with the world. In years to come, when William's own coronation day arrived, he would carry with him the knowledge that his greatest moments of leadership might well be his most authentically human ones, just as they had been on the day his father became king. And the world witnessed the beautiful sight of a son moved to tears by love, pride, and the profound understanding of service that would define his own reign.